All right, everyone, we've got a bigger crowd now, so let's go ahead and get started. My name is Katie, and I will be handling today's webinar logistics. A few housekeeping items before we get started. Everyone, all attendees are muted by default. However, if you have a question at any point during the presentation, you could submit it through the QA pane. Our speaker will address questions at the end of the presentation. And before I hand over the floor to our speaker, very briefly, I'd like to share a bit about her background. So your speaker today is Ulrica de Fort-Menares. She is the Vice President of Product Strategy at Indeni. She started her career as a network engineer, working for two of Canada's most respected organizations, the Canadian Railway and the Royal Bank of Canada. In both roles, she was responsible for the network and keeping their business up and running. After 9 years in IT, Ulrica was converted to the dark side, as we like to say. She joined Cisco, where she held various engineering and product management positions for Cisco's video collaboration software, WAN optimization, and their network performance management solutions. Most recently, prior to joining Indeni, Ulrica led product strategy for Live Action, where she was responsible for defining the vision, strategy, and execution of their application-aware network performance monitoring product line. Today, as the VP of Products and Strategy at Indeni, she is focused on building a knowledge-based network automation platform for IT. Now, without further ado, I would like to introduce our speaker, Ulrica. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Katie, and thank you everyone for joining. So years ago when I was a network engineer, it was never easy. There was never enough time in the day to do what I wanted to do. And Indeni is a platform, automation platform for network and security. I wish that back then it was there because it could help me save a lot of the time doing a lot of the repetitive work so that I could do something more strategic. So what I'm going to be sharing with you in the next 30 minutes or so is to talk a little bit about the automation future, where we see what our vision is, and also spend a little bit of time to give you a quick overview before we dive right into the demo, highlighting a number of new capabilities in 6.0 release. And then we'll probably wrap up with just, for those of you that are current customers that are running 5.5, I want to show you some of the considerations, and then we can go into Q&A. So at Indeni, we recognize that there are a few steps to maybe 4 stages to automation. Started off where we humans drive cars a lot like the automobile industry. So you have humans that run the network and do all the maintenance. And then until Indeni came along, we realized that we really don't want to be alone. Why don't we just leverage a lot of the experts out in the industry? So we developed this crowdsourced platform where we get help from the other parts of the world. It's kind of a little like Waze, because when you're driving, you don't really have to be alone. Why don't we just get help from all the drivers? It's a very similar concept. As we progress down the automation path, we customers are getting used to the fact that we automate a lot of the troubleshootings. We make recommendations to some of the remediation steps. They're beginning to ask us, why not take one step further? Perhaps we can help them fix some of the issues. Now I know that sounds a little bit scary, but think about it. Maybe we could just start with something that's relatively low risks. Things like, hey, you are not compliant. Maybe we could just make a simple change. And then, like thinking back into the car industry, it's a lot like I get into the car and it tells me that my car is ready for maintenance. So it's a lot like that. And then eventually we'll get to truly like a self-driving car concept with the IT world. And as we migrate to the cloud, we're seeing more and more interest in the automation to be able to, do a lot of the automation. So before we do that, let me just, see where Indeni kind of fits in the bigger scheme of things, right? So here's a quick, very high-level view of the IT infrastructure stack. You have applications, your compute, your network, and your storage. in a way, that automation is really not new to the IT industry. It was led by, like our counterparts from the OS and the server team, that they do a lot of automation. So some of the tools that you might be familiar with, like Puppet, Ansible, and Chef, perhaps not so, like common or really in the network space. And we often get asked, why do we need yet another automation platform for the network, and maybe even storage? And, we realize that they're fundamentally very different in the network and the security industry. For example, like the network devices are not, they are actually hardware. Some of them are legacy. And these embedded devices, they have their own, they implement their own protocol stack. It may not be compatible with your automation platform. And more importantly, a lot of these devices, they don't have APIs. Especially the legacy one, the way we communicate with these devices is still via CLI. And even more importantly, a lot of our customers, the network and security engineers, they really don't have the time to go and do a lot of automation. So they want Indeni to, like help them, bootstrap them, as you will, because out of the box, we have a lot of automation scripts that are developed by industry experts. So why not just, leverage something, and then, as you progress, you can build your own. So now that we have positioned Indeni in the bigger scheme of things, let's look at, let's have a quick overview and talk a little bit about what are some of the key automation use cases. We'll take a look at all the various components before we dive right into the demo. So when I think about, various automation use cases, perhaps one that are very common is, how do I keep my business running? For years, we have been helping customers to automate troubleshooting. For example, with my favorite one is Checkpoint, right? If you have core Excel, you want to make sure that you keep an eye on how many connections per core. You want to make sure that the connections are somewhat balanced. And for these critical devices, you have, high availability environments. If you have whether it's an active or it's an active standby configuration, you want to make sure that your backup is in sync with your primary. Now, that's all, and there are a lot of checks, that you need to do. Now, it's okay, like that. For example, we have the context for Palo Alto network. If you have an active and a passive scenario, then the links in your passive device, in your standby device, they are inactive, but that's okay because that's by design. So we actually have the context, for this type of configuration. The other category, it's about, ongoing maintenance. I remember one customer was telling us that, like they had an outage because they've forgotten to renew the SSL certificates. Not only do some of these tasks are time consuming, but they could be easily forgotten. The third category is always my favorite, best practices and compliance. Compliance could mean a lot of things to different customers. To some, it's about security. Others, it might be regulations. And each organization have their own compliance, right? Some of them want to make sure that, for example, in the firewall, they have dual power supply or dual disk space. And for some, they only care about certain partitions. Best practices is also, like a key area that we never really had time to look into. For example, going back to the Core Excel example, if a device is capable of Core Excel, you're not, leveraging that, you don't have that enabled, like we want to notify you so that way you can really fully leverage your infrastructure for the best performance. Last but not least, when it comes to, agility, making changes, you want to make sure that the changes you made are as expected, and especially in a high availability environment, you want to make sure that they are indeed synchronized. So now let's have a quick overview of all the key components. Let's start from the bottom. So we have your network infrastructure, your firewalls, your routers, switches, your load balancers, etc. And the collector is really responsible for communicating with the device, and that's where all the automation scripts are run. We collect necessary metrics via whatever the device speaks, the CLI or API, through a variety of protocols. The server is your brain, as you will. It's really your back end and your front end, the user interface. And then there's, like my favorite part, which is the knowledge. And noticeably that, this is probably the biggest part of change with 6.0, where we completely decouple our Indeni knowledge. What that means is that it allows us to open this development platform to our community, where we can actually, solicit all these expertise from the industry. So they develop all the automation scripts today. All the scripts are actually developed by industry experts like yourself. And they leverage the crowd to collaborate. Now, it's not just about, some of our crowd members, they actually contribute, automation scripts. Some of them contribute knowledge. We have a lot of our vendors, our partners that help us, do the right thing, guide us along when it comes to the specific domain knowledge for the particular device. Last but not least, Insight. This is our crowd component, and we crowdsource. We crowdsource a lot of the two ways that we actually do the crowdsourcing. The one aspect is, we collect a lot of data across all our customer install base. That way we can learn about, what are some of the commonly seen issues, what are some of the things like what releases you're running, what is the adoption rate for new releases, and what are some of the most common platforms. So it really provides us a lot of insight. So with all that said, I want to just, go dive right into the product, just looking a little bit about some of the new capabilities. Noticeably, the first thing you'll notice is the brand new user interface that's a lot, easier to use. The other thing you'll notice is a lot of new devices support, like Cisco Nexus switches, 14 and 40 gig, Juniper SRX, Radware, Altion, etc. And then I'm also going to show you a quick demo of Indeni Insight. Now, before the demo, I just want to point out that this is a new feature we just released. Actually, I should say about to release in the next couple of days. It's our centralized authentication. We have integrated with Microsoft Active Directory. So when you upgrade to 6.2, you set up your, a way to talk to Active Directory. Then Indeni would go in and retrieve all the various LDAP groups. So as user comes in, we pass the credential to the Active Directory and, get a, quick search on what LDAP group you belong to. And then, through that, we will successfully, we will authenticate you according to, the group that you are in. Now, let me just jump right to the demo. Okay, this is our main page, and it gives you a summary of all the alerts that you are seeing. So on the top one here, the horizontal one, you see what we call the top 10 alerts. Primarily, these are issues these are the most number of issues that you can see. And then they're classified as critical, error, warning, or info. Over here in the recent alerts, these are the last issue that we observe, and then the various devices that we manage. You can see that there's F5 big IP devices, Nexus, Radware, Gateway, Checkpoint Gateway, Palo Alto Firewall, etc. Now, then there's a heat map. Notice that there's a really dark square here. And that happened actually in late March. That was a really bad day for us because we had a major power outage. So that's why you see that, dark circle. So it kind of gives you, quick at a glance overview of what's been happening in your infrastructure. Now, even in my lab, by the way, this is my lab environment. Even in my lab environment, there are rather a lot of devices. So the way that typically customers use the tool is they would go and create, what we call label is effectively a way that you group devices that make sense to use. So I'm just going to go ahead and, show, I have some labels created in my environment. So I'm just going to, change it to checkpoint, and notice that how it would now only show you how my checkpoint devices are doing in my infrastructure. Notice that dark square here. See, it just across the board affects all our devices. So the next tab is, these are, you can, at a glance, you see all the current issues that have not been resolved. And you can, I'm just going to filter out and only look at alerts that have not been resolved. So I'm going to just go click here. Okay. And notice that, like we provide a rather detailed remediation steps for every single issue. And here, similarly, you can actually filter out, like the devices or the type of devices that are of interest to you. Archived. We keep track of all the archive issues. And for a list of issues, for a list of rules, this is where you can do certain tuning. If you want to change the threshold, for example, a use case is that as part of our policy in this particular organization, you want to put your device into a maintenance. Let's say if the device has been up for more than 90 days, then you want to schedule like a recycle. So what you can do is you can go and find, for example, look for the uptime alert, and you can quickly go and create a new policy. I'm going to call it maintenance and change it to 90 days. And by the way, I only want that to be applicable to my checkpoint devices. And also just send it to me via email. This way you can quickly create your automation scripts for these devices to go into maintenance. The next tab I want to show you is what we call the analysis tab. And I'm just going to bring up a couple of, this time I'm probably going to pick on, let's pick on Palo Alto Network. I'm going to show you something quite interesting, so just bear with me for a sec. We're just doing some testing in our lab on the Palo Alto 5060, and I'm just going to bring it up and talk. Just bear with me. Okay. So this particular tab, it's a way for me to query all the data that we've collected in the backend and ask questions like, hey, how, like if I have a lot of connections, what you can see here, what you're seeing here is that, we have we started that yesterday, by the way. We had no connections in those sessions, and then we fire off our traffic generator, and you can see that it goes all the way up to 500,000 sessions that we were generating in our lab and environment. You're driving all that traffic through your Palo Alto 5060. Interestingly, you can see that the CPU drove up. We went quite a bit up because as the sessions were, starting. Okay, mouse over here. Actually, let me make it just slightly bigger so it's easier to see. And grab that particular hour where we're just starting the session. And I'm going to mouse over. You can see that, that some of the CPUs are going up. And then as it progresses, it goes down. But the interesting thing, what we were trying to do here is to make sure that as there were a lot of sessions, like the actual CPU of the management plane remained relatively low. You can actually see some of that. Yeah, the data plane CPUs was going up. You can see that. And then, but the management remained pretty much constant. So you can, also, pretty much a lot of the metrics we collect, we store the data for up to a year. And you can go back and, look at what happened historically. Other similar use cases that, quite common that we see people using this particular graph is if you have an HA environment, you want to compare, how's your primary versus your backup are performing. The next tab is our devices. And if you are our 5.5 customers, there's live config tab, we can actually take a snapshot of your device. And this is where the device tab is where you will get similar information. Okay. And this is also where you would create a new label. Label, it's just a random way for me to group devices that make sense to me. So I'm gonna just undo this one. And I can actually pick, say I wanna create a label called firewall. I pick SRX, Juniper SRX. I pick one of the checkpoint devices, and maybe I'll go pick a Palo Alto firewalls. And I can just randomly group them as my firewall. And then this label has just been created, and then you can start doing all kinds of analysis. Okay. The other thing I want to show you is our inventory report. So here, I'm going to select checkpoint. I'm going to select all my checkpoint. And the use case here is I want to review all the various licenses. So I'm going to create an inventory report and simply click on, let's check on all the certificate expiration. And we'll generate a report. And here's a list of all my checkpoint devices and the expiration dates. I'll make it easier for you to see. And here's the names and the expiration date. Okay. Let me just, okay. Next thing I want to do a quick demo is how do you add new devices? You can add new devices by providing a device name and IP address, or we can import it from, like a spreadsheet. And the other new capability is, notice here, there's a button called Add Known Devices. Through the automation scripts, we learn about other devices that are not managed by Indeni. So here you can just click on anyone and it will just add the device. Okay. The next tab I'm going to show you is something unique to 6.0. This is actually one of my favorites as well because I'm lazy. I don't want to use CLIs. And you'll notice that most of the administrative tasks are now done via your UI. This is my favorite. One click away, I can actually upgrade my instance to 6.2. There's licensing informations and various integrations. Okay, now, moving to the next new feature set. This is the beginning of our journey when it comes to the development environment. We call this INDE, stands for Indeni Device Environment. Within the product, you'll now be able to see the actual automation scripts that we are executing from the collector on your device. So if you go into this particular file structure, you see the various devices. So say checkpoint is the one of interest, and I'm actually already picked out a particular script that I want to show you. This one has to do with Core Excel, as I was talking about Core Excel. This particular script, to you checkpoint experts, this particular command is probably very familiar to you. And this script tells you that it will be executed every 5 minutes, and to an embedded Gaia operating systems. And you can actually go and look at, the idea is that, not only can you look at it, you can actually see what commands that get executed to generate the particular issue. Over time, our intent is if you want to make, changes like how often you want that, it can be done as we progress in that automation journey. The next thing I want to show you is Indeni Insight. Now I'm just going to limit to, showing you some, like what we can see from checkpoint, for example, as an example. Here's all the checkpoint devices that we're currently managing across, our customers who are running 6.0 or above. You see the majority of our customers are still running R77.30. And we can actually have insight as to what are some of the most frequently alerts and alerts that are flapping and the type of devices. So Insight is really a good way for you to see when it comes to adoption, new versions, or what are some of the common issues that we can observe across our customer installed base. So if you are already a 6.0 or later customers, I strongly encourage you to enable Insight. So that concludes my very, very high level quick demo. So I'm going to switch back to our slide, and I'm just going to wrap up, and then we can get into Q&A. Okay. Okay. I know this is a bit of an eye chart, but the intent here is to give you a cheat sheet for 5.5 customers if you want to kind of compare and contrast where we are in terms of features. But the key message here is, you're going to see that over time, if all the 5.5 features will be implemented in 6.x or later. In fact, I would say right now, perhaps about 80% of the features are already there. And you see that, there are going to be capabilities that will not be available in 5.5, such as some of these new, new device types. Oops. With that, I'm going to pass it back to Katie, and maybe we can get on to a Q&A session.
Sounds great. Thanks, Ulrica. Before we jump into Q&A, we'd like to invite you to take the next step and dive deeper, whether you're just exploring Indeni or if you're already a customer. We have 2 dedicated learning paths for you where you can ask questions, get answers. As a customer, get access to more folks inside Indeni, both executives and your account team. A lot of feedback opportunities around, requesting features, voting on roadmap items, and then also there's a number of exclusive rewards. And the Indeni trial as well, you can get to know the platform in a very fun way and be rewarded for learning. So we will share this link after the presentation. So why don't we flip over to questions? There were a couple that came in, so Ulrica, I'll go ahead and ask you them. As a reminder, you can still submit questions through the question pane. And our first question comes from a gentleman. How does Indeni compare to other network automation solutions?
So I think the key, there's a lot of platforms out there and solutions. I think the one thing I would point out very unique about Indeni is the crowdsource aspect. I mean, I've been in this industry for a long time, and I learned to appreciate that every vendors have their specialties. It's not possible for me to, know about all the different intricacies of the various implementation. The only way we think it can scale in our industry is through crowdsourcing. You don't have to do that alone. You really, should get help from your colleagues across the globe. I think that's probably the most unique part about Indeni.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Okay, the next question actually is related to that. The question is, how do you crowdsource your knowledge?
Okay. Yeah, there are a couple of aspects. I mean, I show you like a really quick overview of Indeni Insight. And we learned about, by the way, all the information obfuscated and anonymized. So there's absolutely no sensitive information. And through that, what we were able to do is gain a lot of insights about what customers, the current deployments and what kind of issues that are common. So I think that's, a really, important aspect from the crowdsourcing. And the second part is really around, how can we get everybody to, start doing their own automation. Our intent is really putting the responsibility of automation in the hands of the engineers so that they can actually, buy back a lot of time, I think. And it's not just about, the the automation, writing the code and building scripts. It's also about sharing your knowledge. I think that's the part that, like relating to the first question, it's the ability to collaborate.
Got it. Okay, we've got another one here. Can Indeni alert all high and critical alerts from Palo Alto networks instead of selecting and adding specific ones? I think this is, and maybe, kind of chat me for the gentleman that sent this. But is it so? Is there any? What are the types of alerts that we can display for Palo Alto?
Oh, okay. So great question. So especially in 6.0, like we pretty much the type of alerts that we have for Palo Alto network are on par with Checkpoint. That's the general arching one, and we're learning a lot of different implementation, as you will, for example, I'm just giving an example, right? But there are lots, and I can definitely get you all the details and all the different types of alerts. For example, I want to point out that we're learning that the implementation in Palo Alto is slightly different than other vendors. The fact that if you have a HA environment, if the device was passive, like it's just the implementation was very different. So yes, I'd love to hook up with you offline so we can actually look at like the extensive of the alerts. A great question.
Yep. Okay, we've got a question around Blue Coat. Can you tell us about the path for Blue Coat? When will support return, and if so?
Yeah, I can. Well, you probably saw that when I opened up the Indeni Development Environment portal, you probably saw some of the scripts already for Blue Coat. That's because, yes, we are actively working on Blue Coat development. Timeline-wise, I can only share that it's going to be sometimes this year.
Great. Thank you. And definitely keep your questions coming in. We'll get to them as soon as we can. Another question here is, do I have to know how to code to contribute?
Absolutely not. Like use Indeni to bootstrap and take your time, because we also out of the box there's so many scripts that you can leverage without doing any coding. But the point is that like remember that we have the we have the community. Leverage the community to help you build, if you have a customized script, you can always leverage the community to build something for you, and then eventually maybe getting to a point that you want to start doing your own automation.
Very good. Okay, we've got another one here. Does this mean you are no longer a monitoring company?
Great question and great observation. Honestly, we go with the pace of our customers. We started off as a monitoring company helping customers, but through guidance from a lot of our loyal and long-term customers, we noticed that we're really moving away from, not quite moving away, but going to the next journey, which is why don't we, in addition to getting the remediation steps, why don't we go one step further to start fixing, helping you automate a lot more tasks to free you up. So yes, we're still, like monitoring is still necessary, and we're really progressing to the next stage of our journey, which is, why don't you get the machine to help you maintain your infrastructure as we, laid out the various stages in the automation journey. So absolutely a really good observation. Thank you for that.
Okay, we've got another one here. Can you clarify if you are doing provisioning, or how does this differ?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because like automation is a very, very broad term. In the world of cloud, automation means that you want to be able to spin up a lot of instances. And in the networking security, that's coming certainly, like with SDN and virtual instances, we definitely need that capability. And that's why we see a lot more automation platforms coming into the market. But how about your legacy devices? Like you're not, like automation is not just about provisioning, but it's also about like automating a lot of that main, like time-consuming maintenance tasks, such as, like the certificate expiration, you need to constantly check on that. Things like uptime that we showed you is due for maintenance, right? And you don't want to have to do it manually. So there are, like what the industry term the runbook automation, can we actually help you get more data and more information when you run into issues? So there are a lot more, like runbook related type of tasks that you can automate.
Wonderful.
And eventually we'll get to provisioning when you're ready.
Sounds great. Well, everyone, it will conclude the QA portion of our presentation. As a next step, we, of course, invite you to join those learning paths as mentioned. And if we didn't address your question, or if you have a follow-up one, feel free to email us at marketing@indeni.com, and we will route that to the correct product specialist. Also, be sure to check out the community at community.indeni.com, where you can ask your questions, everything from professional development to automation to developing the Indeni scripts to asking questions about the product. And with that, that concludes our webinar. So Ulrica, thank you very much for your time today.
And thank you everyone for joining.
We hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks so much.